Glass exploded inward as a bleeding Army Ranger collapsed onto the ER linoleum, hunted by relentless shadows. When a heavily armed hit squad raised their rifles to finish him, an exhausted night shift nurse didn't run. She stepped directly in front of the barrel. Suddenly, the hospital walls began to shake. The digital clock above the nurse's station glowed blood red, 2:14 a.m. Mercy General Hospital sat on the absolute edge of a secluded Colorado mountain range, miles away from the sprawling city lights. It was a 50-bed facility, habitually underfunded and primarily staffed by a skeletal night crew who spent most of their shifts dealing with drunken snowboarders logging accidents or the occasional bar fight. Evelyn Hayes rubbed the bridge of her nose, the fluorescent lights buzzing a relentless migraine-inducing hum above her. At 32, Evelyn had seen enough blood to fill an Olympic swimming pool. Before trading her combat boots for medical clogs, she had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. She knew what real trauma looked like, and she knew the silence that always preceded it. Dr. Samuel Harrison, a man counting the days until his retirement, was dozing in the break room. The lobby was entirely empty. Outside, a freak early November blizzard was burying the mountain roads in a suffocating layer of white. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Then came the screech of tires. It wasn't the rhythmic, heavy sound of an ambulance. It was the desperate, grinding shriek of rubber burning against icy asphalt. Evelyn's head snapped up just in time to see a matte black Chevy Tahoe violently jump the curb and smash through the protective bollards of the ambulance bay. The vehicle was completely destroyed, its windshield spider-webbed with bullet holes, the front right tire shredded to the rim. "Harrison! Get out here!" Evelyn screamed, already moving. She grabbed a trauma bag, kicking the sliding doors off their automated track when they failed to open fast enough. The driver's side door of the Tahoe kicked open. A man in tactical gear, unmarked, drenched in rain and blood, stumbled out. He didn't make it 3 steps before he collapsed onto the concrete. The rear door swung wide, and another man emerged, dragging a third. "Help him!" The standing man roared, his voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. "He's bleeding out! Take him!" Evelyn sprinted toward them, the freezing wind biting through her thin scrubs. The man being dragged was unconscious, his tactical vest completely soaked in dark arterial blood. He was a giant of a man, easily over 200 pounds of sheer muscle, but his skin was the color of dirty ash. What happened? Evelyn demanded, her hands instinctively moving over his body to find the primary source of the bleeding. She found it immediately, a massive gunshot wound to the right pectoral, missing the plate carrier entirely. The exit wound on his back was the size of a grapefruit. "Ambush!" The standing man gasped, his eyes darting wildly toward the pitch-black tree line beyond the hospital parking lot. "They're hunting us. We couldn't make it to the base. You have to save..." A sharp, suppressed thwip cut through the howling wind. The man speaking to Evelyn suddenly went rigid. A neat red hole appeared in the dead center of his forehead. He dropped like a stone. Evelyn froze for a fraction of a second. Her combat instincts, buried under years of civilian life, violently snapped awake. Sniper. "Get down!" Evelyn shrieked to Dr. Harrison, who had just stepped through the ER doors. She didn't run for cover. Instead, she grabbed the unconscious giant by the drag handle of his tactical vest and threw all of her body weight backward. Another suppressed round shattered the concrete exactly where her foot had been a millisecond prior. Adrenaline flooding her veins, Evelyn hauled the massive soldier across the slick linoleum floor, leaving a thick, horrifying smear of crimson in their wake. Lock down the hospital code silver. Do it now, Evelyn barked at the stunned receptionist, a 20-year-old college student who was trembling violently behind the desk. Evelyn dragged the soldier into trauma room, once slamming the heavy door shut. Dr. Harrison crawled in right behind her, his face pale. "Evelyn, what the hell was that? Who are these people?" Harrison stammered, pulling on gloves with shaking hands. "Scissors," Evelyn ordered, ignoring his panic. She began cutting away the soldier's blood-soaked Kevlar and tactical shirt. "I need quick clot 4 units of O negative and a chest tube kit. Now, Harrison, move." As the soldier's chest was exposed, Evelyn's breath hitched. Above the massive bullet wound tattooed cleanly across his collarbone was the unmistakable crest of the United States Army Rangers. Attached to a dog tag around his neck was a name, Miller Wyatt. And tightly clutched in his left fist so hard his knuckles were white was a small, blood-smeared encrypted hard drive. Suddenly, Wyatt Miller's eyes snapped open. They were wild, feverish, and fully dilated. His massive hand shot out, grabbing Evelyn's wrist with bone-crushing force. Don't let them take it," Wyatt choked out, coughing up a fine mist of blood. "Kincaid, rogue PMC. They slaughtered my team. If they get the drive, our operatives overseas, all dead. Captain Miller, stay with me. You're in a hospital," Evelyn said, keeping her voice incredibly steady, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in her own mind. "I am going to pack this wound. It's going to hurt like hell." "They're coming!" Wyatt wheezed, his grip slipping as his eyes rolled back. "They won't leave witnesses. Run!" Wyatt flatlined. The heart monitor let out a continuous piercing shriek. "He's coding start compressions," Harrison yelled, moving in with the defibrillator paddles. "No time," Evelyn said grimly. She grabbed the quick clot combat gauze, shoved her fingers directly into the open cavity of the ranger's chest, and began aggressively packing the wound to stop the internal hemorrhaging. "Hit him with a milligram of epinephrine." Outside the trauma room, the lights of the hospital flickered. Then, with a heavy mechanical groan, the entire facility plunged into absolute darkness. The relentless hum of the machinery died. 10 seconds later, the faint yellow emergency backup lights kicked on, casting long, nightmarish shadows across the sterile walls. Evelyn looked at Dr. Harrison. The old doctor was terrified, clutching a scalpel like a weapon. "The phones are dead," the receptionist cried out from the hallway. "Cell service is gone. There's no signal." They had used a localized cellular jammer. This wasn't a random hit. This was a highly coordinated professional assault, and Evelyn knew with terrifying certainty that the men outside weren't going to wait for the police to arrive. They were coming inside. The backup generator provided just enough power to keep the essential life support machines running. In Trauma Room 1, Evelyn wiped a streak of sweat and blood from her forehead. Wyatt Miller had a pulse again, weak, thready, but there. She had secured the chest tube, relieving the tension pneumothorax that had been crushing his lungs. But he desperately needed a surgical theater, not an under-equipped ER. "We have to evacuate," Harrison whispered, peering through the small glass window of the trauma door. "We can take him down to the basement mortuary, slip out through the loading dock. They have snipers on the perimeter. If we step outside, we're dead," Evelyn replied. She took the encrypted drive from Wyatt's slack hand and slipped it deep into the pocket of her scrubs. We move him to the radiology wing. The walls in the X-ray and CT rooms are lined with thick lead to stop radiation. It'll stop rifle rounds. Before Harrison could argue, the hospital's PA system crackled to life. A smooth, unnervingly calm voice echoed through the empty corridors. Good evening to the staff of Mercy General. My name is Victor Kincaid. I apologize for the structural damage to your facility. We are looking for a patient who was just admitted. An Army Ranger. He possesses stolen property that belongs to my organization. Surrender him to us, and the rest of you may go home to your families. You have 60 seconds. If you force us to search the rooms, we will clear them violently. The clock starts now. Harrison was shaking uncontrollably. We have to give him up, Evelyn. We're doctors, not soldiers. We can't fight a private army. Evelyn looked down at the unconscious Ranger. Wyatt Miller had taken a bullet to protect whatever was on that drive intel that Kincaid's rogue PMC had killed an entire team of American soldiers to cover up. He's my patient, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to an icy, resolute whisper. And I don't abandon my patients. She locked the wheels on Wyatt's gurney. Harrison grabbed the IV bags. Help me push. They slammed the gurney through the trauma doors, sprinting down the darkened hallway toward the radiology wing. Behind them, at the main entrance, they heard the distinct, terrifying sound of heavy boots shattering glass. The breach had happened. Kincaid's mercenaries were inside. Clear the lobby, check the desk. A gruff voice echoed from the front. Evelyn and Harrison shoved the gurney into the X-ray observation room. It was a tight squeeze. Evelyn locked the heavy lead-lined door, pulling a heavy supply cabinet in front of it to barricade the entryway. She shut off all the monitors in the room, plunging them into near-total darkness. Hide, Evelyn whispered to Harrison, pointing to the small closet where the lead aprons were kept. What about you? Harrison breathed. I have to keep him breathing, she replied, grabbing an oxygen tank and a pair of trauma shears, the only thing closely resembling a weapon she could find. Footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. They were methodical, tactical, not rushing, but clearing every single room with deadly precision. Evelyn heard doors being kicked open, equipment being smashed, and the muffled cries of the receptionist being interrogated somewhere down the hall. The footsteps stopped right outside the X-ray room. A heavy hand rattled the door handle. It was locked. Room's locked, a muffled voice said through the heavy door. Breaching. Boom. A shaped charge blew the lock clean off the hinges. The heavy metal door violently swung inward, slamming the supply cabinet out of the way like it was made of cardboard. A mercenary stepped into the room. He was wearing night vision goggles, a plate carrier, and carrying a suppressed short-barreled rifle. The green glow of his optics swept the room. He immediately spotted the gurney and the massive bleeding man lying on it. Target secured, the mercenary hissed into his radio. Radiology wing, moving to confirm kill and secure the package. The mercenary raised his rifle, stepping closer to Wyatt Miller's unconscious body. He aimed the laser sight squarely at the center of the Ranger's forehead. He didn't care about the drive yet. He just wanted to neutralize the threat. Evelyn didn't think. The civilian part of her brain, the part that valued self-preservation and safety, completely shut off. The combat medic took over. As the mercenary's finger tightened on the trigger, Evelyn lunged from the shadows. She didn't try to tackle him. He was too big. Instead, she threw her own body over Wyatt Miller, shielding the Ranger's head and chest with her own back. Pfft! the suppressed rifle fired. The impact felt like being struck by a freight train traveling at Mach speed. The 5.56 round tore through Evelyn's right shoulder, shattering her clavicle and spinning her violently off the gurney. She hit the floor hard, her vision instantly exploding into blinding white stars. The pain was absolute, a searing fire that stole the air directly from her lungs. She gasped, tasting copper, her scrubs instantly soaking with her own blood. "Stupid bitch!" the mercenary grunted, stepping over her writhing body. He recalibrated his aim, pointing the rifle back at Wyatt. "Now you both die." Evelyn lay on the cold floor, her right arm completely paralyzed, her vision swimming. She watched the mercenary rack the bolt of his rifle. She had failed. They were both going to die here on the floor of a forgotten mountain hospital. But before the mercenary could pull the trigger, a strange sound vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a footstep. It was a deep, rhythmic thrumming. The sound of heavy rotary blades cutting through the blizzard outside. Not one helicopter, several. Thwump, thwump, thwump. The mercenary paused, his head tilting toward the ceiling. "Kincaid, you hearing that? We got company." There was static on his radio, followed by Kincaid's panicked voice. "Abort, abort. The perimeter is breached." They dropped right out of the sky. It's the... Kincaid's transmission was cut off by the deafening roar of an explosion that shook the entire hospital foundation to its core. The emergency lights shattered. From the hallway outside the X-ray room, Evelyn heard the sound of Kincaid's men screaming. But these weren't shouts of tactical communication. They were screams of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Contact front!" a voice outside yelled. A relentless, deafening barrage of fully automatic gunfire erupted in the hallway. It wasn't the suppressed, quiet weapons of the mercenaries. It was the thunderous, overwhelming roar of M4 carbines and heavy machine guns. The mercenary inside the X-ray room abandoned Wyatt and spun toward the door, raising his weapon. A flashbang grenade bounced perfectly through the doorway, landing right at his boots. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut and covered her ears with her one good arm. Crack, boom! The blinding flash of light and concussive wave threw the mercenary backward. Before he could even hit the ground, 3 figures poured into the room, moving with terrifying speed and synchronized perfection. 4 distinct gunshots rang out in rapid succession. The mercenary dropped dead to the floor. Evelyn, blinking through the smoke and ringing in her ears, looked up. Standing over her were men dressed in full combat gear. They weren't police. They weren't SWAT. And they definitely weren't Kincaid's men. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a tactical radio strapped to his chest, knelt beside Evelyn. The patch on his right shoulder caught the dim light of a tactical flashlight. A sword. 3 lightning bolts. And the words, De oppresso liber. The Green Berets had arrived. "Secure the perimeter, lock down the ward." The squad leader, Major John Taggart, barked into his comms. He looked down at Evelyn, his eyes shifting from her bleeding shoulder to the unconscious ranger she had used her own body to protect. "Hold on, Doc," Taggart said, his voice a low, commanding rumble, as 50 of America's most lethal soldiers stormed the hospital corridors, turning the hunters into the hunted. "We've got the watch now." The acrid smell of cordite and burned magnesium from the flashbang grenade instantly overwhelmed the sterile, bleach-scented air of the radiology wing. Evelyn choked on the smoke, her right arm hanging uselessly at her side, a terrifying numbness beginning to spread from her shattered clavicle down to her fingertips. The deafening echo of the short-barreled rifle and the ensuing blast left a high-pitched, continuous ringing in her ears, making the tactical chatter of the Green Berets sound as if they were speaking underwater. Major John Taggart moved with a terrifying, fluid grace that betrayed his massive, heavily armored frame. He stepped over the neutralized mercenary, sweeping the corridor with the muzzle of his M4 carbine. "Hold the line at the junction. Nobody gets past the nursing station," he roared into his throat mic, his voice a gravelly bark that commanded absolute obedience. "Jackson, get on the dock. Check the Ranger." A second operator, slightly leaner but moving with the same lethal precision, dropped to one knee beside Evelyn. The name tape on his plate carrier read, "Jackson." Without a word, he ripped a trauma dressing from his kit, his hands moving with the practiced mechanical speed of a Special Forces medic. "Stay with me, Doc," Jackson ordered, his eyes briefly locking onto hers. "You took a through and through to the anterior shoulder. Clavicle is fractured, but it looks like the subclavian artery is intact. You're lucky. I'm packing this tight. Grit your teeth." Before Evelyn could brace herself, Jackson shoved the combat gauze directly into her open wound. The pain was absolute, a blinding flash of white-hot agony that arched her back off the cold linoleum floor. She bit through her lower lip, tasting copper, fighting the overwhelming urge to scream. Jackson wrapped her shoulder tightly, securing her arm against her chest with a makeshift sling fashioned from a torn surgical gown. "The Ranger!" Evelyn gasped out her vision, swimming, as she forced herself to look past Jackson. "He coded pneumothorax. I packed the chest cavity, but he's losing too much blood. He needs an OR, not an X-ray room." Jackson moved to Wyatt Miller's unconscious massive frame. He checked the chest tube Evelyn had hastily inserted. "You did good, Doc. You kept him breathing. Taggart the Ranger is critical. We need an immediate medevac. If we don't get him in the air in 10 minutes, he's a ghost. Negative on the immediate medevac," Taggart replied, stepping backward into the X-ray room and covering the door. "The blizzard has completely grounded the conventional choppers, and Kincaid's boys have heavy weapons positioned in the tree line. Our birds had to drop us on the roof and pull back to a holding pattern 3 miles out. We are boxed in until we neutralize the anti-air threat." Outside the heavy lead-lined walls of the X-ray room, the hospital had descended into absolute madness. The continuous terrifying roar of automatic weapons fire echoed through the empty wards. Kincaid's private military contractors, highly trained and vicious, had realized they were severely outgunned by the elite operational detachment Alpha team. But they were desperate, trapped, and fighting with the ferocity of cornered animals. Then the hospital's intercom crackled to life once more. Kincaid's voice echoed through the blood-slicked hallways, but the smooth, unnerving calm from before was completely gone. Now he sounded unhinged, frantic. "You arrogant military fools!" Kincaid spat over the PA system. "You think you can just drop in and take what's mine? I know who you are. I know you're looking for Miller, but you clearly don't know the layout of this building as well as I do." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She struggled to sit up, leaning heavily against the supply cabinet. "I have your old doctor," Kincaid continued, his voice dripping with malice. "And the little girl from the front desk. They are currently kneeling in the basement, right next to the central oxygen manifold that supplies this entire hospital. I have enough C4 rigged to these tanks to level this entire wing. Bring me Miller and the encrypted drive, or I detonate the charges. You have exactly 3 minutes." Taggart's jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck strained against his collar, He pressed a finger to his earpiece. "Alpha Team Sitrep on the basement." "Major, this is Alpha 2, a static-laced voice replied in Taggart's ear. "Kincaid is heavily fortified in the sub-level utility room. Heavy steel doors, magnetic locks. They've barricaded the stairwells with medical equipment. We try to breach forcefully. He hits the detonator before we can clear the fatal funnel. We need a distraction." Evelyn felt the cold, hard edges of the encrypted hard drive pressing deeply into the pocket of her blood-soaked scrubs. Wyatt Miller had taken a bullet for this drive. She had taken a bullet to protect Wyatt. The drive contained proof of Kincaid's atrocities, the slaughter of American operatives overseas. It was the only reason the Green Berets were here, risking everything in a suicidal drop into a blizzard. "Major!" Evelyn croaked, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with pure, unadulterated steel. Taggart looked down at her. "He doesn't want Miller. He wants the drive." With her one good hand, Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out the blood-smeared metal-cased hard drive. Taggart's eyes widened slightly, a rare show of surprise from a hardened operator. "I have it," Evelyn said, her breathing shallow and ragged. "He thinks Miller still has it on him. You want a distraction, use me." "Absolutely not," Taggart growled, stepping forward and reaching for the drive. "You are a civilian casualty. You've done enough. Hand it over, Doctor. That's a direct order." Evelyn pulled the drive back, her grip tightening despite the agonizing pain radiating through her right side. "I was an Army combat medic, Major. I know exactly how this works. Kincaid knows his men are losing the gunfight upstairs. He's cornered in the basement. He expects you to breach the door. He doesn't expect a bleeding, half-dead nurse to walk down there to negotiate. I can get close. I can buy your men the 3 seconds they need to bypass the barricade. If he sees you, he'll shoot you on sight," Jackson interjected, shaking his head. "It's suicide." "He needs the drive intact," Evelyn countered, struggling to her feet. The room spun violently, black edges encroaching on her peripheral vision, but she forced herself to stand tall. "If I hold it over a chemical incinerator bin or threaten to smash it, he has to talk. Just get your men in position." Taggart stared at her. The hospital vibrated violently as another explosion rocked the second floor, raining dust and ceiling tiles down onto the linoleum. Time was rapidly bleeding out. The Green Beret commander saw the fierce, unyielding resolve burning in Evelyn's eyes, the exact same look he had seen in the eyes of his most decorated soldiers. "You have 2 minutes, Taggart finally said, his voice dropping an octave. "We move behind you. Do not falter." The descent into the hospital basement was a living nightmare. Flickering emergency lights illuminated the dark stairwell, accompanied by the overwhelming stench of raw sewage and explosive residue. Evelyn walked slowly. Every step sent agonizing shockwaves through her shattered collarbone. Her scrubs were completely saturated in blood, sticking to her skin in a gruesome display. She held the encrypted drive tightly in her left hand, elevated so anyone watching the security cameras could see it clearly. Behind her, moving with the terrifying silence of apex predators, Major John Taggart and 3 of his deadliest operators shadowed her descent. They communicated purely through hand signals, stacking up tightly behind the final concrete pillar just outside the heavy steel doors of the utility room. Evelyn stepped into the open. The barricade was massive. Overturned medication carts, heavy filing cabinets, and hospital beds piled high in a desperate attempt to block the doorway. Through a narrow gap in the debris, Evelyn could see the terrified face of the young receptionist, kneeling beside a badly beaten Dr. Harrison. Standing directly behind them, holding a detonator switch in one hand and a heavy caliber pistol in the other, was Victor Kincaid. Kincaid. Evelyn shouted, her voice echoing loudly off the cold concrete walls. She suppressed a cough, fighting the rising nausea. "I have it. I have the drive." Kincaid snapped his head toward the gap in the barricade. His eyes narrowed, trying to make out the lone, bloodied figure standing in the dim lighting. The nurse, the one who thinks she is a hero. "Miller is dead," Evelyn lied flawlessly, her voice steady and echoing with grim authority. "The Green Berets upstairs are tearing your men apart. You have no exfil, and you have no leverage. Let the hostages go, and I slide the drive across the floor." "You think I am an idiot?" Kincaid laughed, a sharp, manic sound. "I blow this building, the drive survives the fire. I will dig it out of the rubble myself. Toss it through the gap right now, or the old man gets a bullet in his skull." Kincaid pressed the muzzle of his pistol violently against the head of Dr. Harrison. Harrison squeezed his eyes shut, whimpering softly. Evelyn did not flinch. She took a deliberate step forward, pulling a heavy metallic object from her pocket. It was not just the drive. She had grabbed a solid magnetic safety brick from the radiology room. She slammed the drive down onto the concrete floor and hovered the heavy metal brick directly over it. "This is an encrypted solid-state drive," Evelyn yelled, her eyes locked dead onto Kincaid. "One heavy strike with this brick shatters the internal platters into dust. It is unrecoverable. You blow the tanks, the concussive force drops this brick. The drive dies with us. You get nothing. Your employers will hunt you down." Kincaid froze. For exactly 2 seconds. The mercenary commander short-circuited as he desperately tried to calculate the physics and the tactical disadvantage of the situation. He lowered the pistol a fraction of an inch to look directly at the drive on the floor. 2 seconds was an eternity for a Green Beret. "Execute," Taggart whispered over the comms. From the ventilation shaft directly above Kincaid, an operator silently dropped into the room. He did not use a firearm to risk hitting the explosive tanks. He landed squarely on Kincaid, driving a 6-inch combat blade directly through the gap in the body armor, severing his spinal cord instantly. Kincaid dropped. The detonator clattered harmlessly to the floor. Simultaneously, Taggart and his men breached the barricade, ripping the metal carts aside with brute force. They flooded the utility room instantly, securing the hostages and sweeping the dark corners for any remaining threats. "Clear!" Taggart roared. "Basement is secure, threat neutralized." Evelyn let out a long exhale. The adrenaline evaporated, leaving behind crushing agony and profound exhaustion. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, the darkness finally rushing in to claim her. When she opened her eyes again, the harsh white fluorescent lights of a hospital room blinded her. It was not Mercy General. The ceiling tiles were clean, the air smelled heavily of high-grade antiseptic, and the steady rhythmic beeping of a modern cardiac monitor filled the room. Evelyn blinked, trying to clear the heavy fog of powerful painkillers from her brain. Her right arm was heavily bandaged and immobilized in a complex brace. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Doc." Evelyn turned her head slowly. Sitting in a chair beside her bed, wearing starched military dress blues, was Major John Taggart. He looked surprisingly different without the blood soot and tactical gear. "Captain Miller is alive and safe today. You saved his life, hero. If this story of Evelyn's incredible bravery and the Green Berets' unstoppable rescue got your heart pounding, don't leave without hitting that like button. It really helps the channel bring more unbelievable real-life drama stories to you. Share this video with a friend who loves intense action-packed thrillers, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our next epic tale. Stay safe out there, and see you in the next one.